If someone had told me a year ago that my life, my meticulously ordered, predictably quiet life, would be completely overturned by a burst pipe and a man named Cole, I would have cataloged the suggestion under fiction. Absurd. My world was built of silence and the dry, papery scent of history. It was a fortress of solitude, and I was its willing, permanent resident. I didn't come to this small town looking for connection. I came looking for an escape from it. And for 5 years, it had worked. My days followed a script I had written myself. I was the sole archivist for the Blackwood County Historical Society, a grand title for a man who spent his time in the hushed, dusty basement of a repurposed 19th-century courthouse. I spoke more to ghosts than to living people. The rustle of brittle newspaper was my conversation, the faint scent of decaying leather, a familiar perfume. My apartment was a smaller, cleaner version of my workspace. Books arranged by subject, clothes by color, a life curated to within an inch of its soul. Then there was Cole. Cole was noise. He was the rumble of his oversized truck engine shattering the morning calm. He was the clatter of tools on pavement, the confident boom of his voice as he called out to someone across the town square. He was the town's go-to contractor, a man who fixed things, built things, wrestled the physical world into submission. He was everything I was not. I observed him from a distance, the way an astronomer observes a distant blazing star. Through the tall, arched window of my archive office, I'd see him. Broad shoulders straining the fabric of a simple gray t-shirt, arms tanned and corded with muscle, a shock of dark hair that was perpetually messy, as if he'd just run his hands through it in thought or frustration. He moved with an easy, unthinking confidence that I found both infuriating and magnetic. He occupied space, claimed it as his own without apology. When he laughed, it was a full-bodied sound that seemed to vibrate through the very flagstones of the square. I, on the other hand, had perfected the art of becoming invisible, of folding myself into the corners of rooms. Our interactions were minimal, transactional. The gutter on the west facade is loose. I'd report, my voice feeling thin and reedy in the open air. He would just nod, his gaze already scanning the roofline, calculating angles and materials. He'd say, "Got it," and that would be the end of it. He never used my name. I was just the quiet man from the old courthouse, the ghost in the machine. To me, he was a symbol of a world I could only watch, a world of simple, physical realities, of sweat and strength, in an uncomplicated place in the community. I resented him for it, for how effortlessly he seemed to belong. And in the most secret, shame-filled corners of my heart, I longed for it. I coveted the way the sun caught the line of his jaw, the way he could fix a broken thing with his bare, capable hands. It was a foolish, silent ache. A book I kept on a high shelf, its spine unopened, its contents a mystery even to myself. The distance between us was more than just professional. It was a canyon carved by personality, by presence and absence, by noise and silence. He was the vibrant, chaotic present, and I was the curator of the quiet past. We were never meant to intersect. But routine is a fragile thing, a dam waiting for the right storm. My storm arrived on a Friday in late October. It had been raining for 3 days, a miserable, persistent drizzle that seeped into the old stone of the courthouse and made the whole building feel damp and melancholic. The forecast promised it would escalate, a real tempest with gale-force winds and a deluge that threatened to flood the valley. I locked up the archive at 5, pulling my collar tight against the wind, looking forward to a weekend of tea, books, and the comforting patter of rain against my window panes. The call came at 2 in the morning. The phone on my nightstand shrieked, dragging me from a dream of drowning in ink. It was Martha, the head of the Historical Society, her voice a frantic squawk over the line. "Now, the main water line in the basement. It's gone." A cold dread, colder than the floorboards beneath my feet, washed over me. The basement, the heart of the archive, the repository for the county's entire paper-bound memory. Birth records, Civil War letters, 100-year-old photographs. An entire world made of pulp and ink, now facing a flood. "I'm on my way," I said, my voice hoarse with sleep and sudden, sickening panic. The drive was a nightmare. The wind threw my small car around the road, and the rain came in blinding sheets, the wipers fighting a losing battle. The town was dark, plunged into a power outage that made the familiar streets feel alien and menacing. The courthouse stood on its hill like a Gothic horror, a dark monolith against a churning, bruised sky. Martha was there, huddled under a large umbrella, her face a mask of distress in the sweep of my headlights. The water is everywhere, Leo. It's a disaster. The smell hit me the moment I opened the heavy oak doors. Not the familiar, comforting scent of old paper, but the rank metallic odor of standing water and wet stone. My heart felt like a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. And then I saw him. Cole. He was standing in the main hall, water dripping from his hair and the hem of his rain slicker, a powerful flashlight in his hand cutting a beam through the oppressive darkness. He wasn't smiling. His face was grim, set. He was already in motion, already at war with the chaos. Martha called me, he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the sound of the storm. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Plumber can't get out here till morning, roads washed out. I've shut off the main, but the damage is done. We need to get everything off the floor. Now, he looked at me, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't distant or dismissive. It was direct, assessing. He was looking at me not as the courthouse ghost, but as the only other person here. An unwilling ally. Forced proximity. The storm had breached my fortress, and the world, in the form of Cole, had come flooding in. We descended into the darkness of the basement. My small keychain flashlight, a pathetic companion to the industrial beam he carried. The sight was worse than I had imagined. A foot of murky water covered the entire floor. Cardboard boxes, swollen and dark with moisture, listed like sinking ships. The lowest shelves of the metal racks were submerged, their precious contents being actively destroyed. A wave of nausea and despair washed over me. This was my life's work, my sanctuary, violated. Hey, Cole's voice was sharp, pulling me from the edge of the spiral. No time for that. Where do we start? What's most valuable? The question was a bucket of cold water. It shocked me back into focus. He was right. Panic was a luxury we couldn't afford. I was the archivist. I knew this place. I knew its secrets. The West Wall, I said, my voice finding a surprising strength. The Harrison Collection. Letters, diaries. Irreplaceable, he just nodded. Show me. And so began the longest night of my life. We worked in a strange, grim rhythm. I would point, my knowledge of the labyrinthine shelving system, the only map we had in the dark. He would move, his strength a brute force solution to the problem of weight and water. He waded into the cold water without hesitation, hoisting heavy, waterlogged boxes into his arms and carrying them up the stone steps to the dry ground of the main hall. My job was triage. As he brought them up, I'd carefully open the sodden boxes, my hands shaking as I assessed the damage. I laid out delicate, bleeding documents on every available flat surface, trying to separate pages to halt the destruction. The ink from a 100-year-old letter smeared under my touch, a ghost giving up its final words. For hours, we didn't speak. The only sounds were the squelch of his boots in the water, our ragged breaths, and the relentless drumming of the storm against the stone walls. In the focused beam of our flashlights, the world shrank to just this task, this desperate race against time and water. I started to see him differently, not as the loud, confident contractor from the town square, but as this focused, determined force. I watched the play of muscles in his back as he lifted a box that I knew must weigh 100 pounds. His movements weren't just strong, they were efficient, precise. He moved with a physical intelligence that was as sharp and honed as my academic knowledge. At one point, he came up the stairs, his t-shirt soaked through and clinging to his chest, his face streaked with grime. He set a heavy box down and leaned against the wall to catch his breath. In the flickering light, I saw a long, pale scar running down the inside of his left forearm, a jagged line that disappeared under the sleeve of his shirt. It was an imperfection, a mark of some past pain or mistake. It made him seem suddenly, shockingly human. He caught me looking. I dropped my eyes, a flush of heat creeping up my neck. I expected a sharp word, a question. Instead, he just pushed himself off the wall. "What's next?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The municipal ledgers," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Aisle 4. They're on the second shelf, but the boxes are old. Fragile." He nodded and disappeared back into the watery darkness. I found myself watching for him, listening for the sound of his footsteps on the stairs. My world, usually so contained and internal, was now hyper-focused on this other person, this unexpected and overwhelming presence. The anxiety that usually hummed just beneath my skin was still there, but it had been repurposed. It was no longer a vague dread about existence. It was a sharp, specific fear for the safety of the documents, and, strangely for him, for this man wading through the dark, cold water. He came back up, carrying a stack of 3 boxes, cradling them carefully. He set them down near me, water pooling around his boots. "These are the ones." "Yes." I breathed, reaching for the top one. It happened in a fraction of a second. He was shifting his grip to steady the stack, and I was reaching out to take the load. Our hands met on the damn cardboard. It wasn't a brush. His hand, large and calloused, and surprisingly warm despite the cold, landed squarely on top of mine. A jolt went through me. Not a spark, but a deep, resonant shock like striking a tuning fork. It traveled up my arm, exploded in my chest, and left me breathless. Every nerve, ending in my body, lit up at once. It was the most profound physical contact I'd had in years. I snatched my hand back as if the box were electrified. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner against the bars. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, a hot tide of shame and panic. He froze. For a beat, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The flashlight beam wavered, catching the confusion in his eyes. I couldn't breathe. I thought he would laugh, or sneer, or say something cutting. But he just blinked. He looked down at his own hand, then back at me. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the hall. "Sorry," he mumbled, turning his attention back to the boxes. He nudged the top one toward me with his elbow. "Here." The moment passed, but it didn't vanish. The ghost of his touch lingered on my skin, a phantom heat. My hand felt alien, sensitized. I couldn't stop replaying the feeling of his palm covering mine, the slight roughness of his calluses, the solid, grounding weight of it. My carefully constructed fortress had been breached, and now the enemy was inside the walls, leaving burning fingerprints on everything he touched. My focus was shot. My hands, usually so steady when handling fragile artifacts, were trembling. I fumbled with the lid of the box, my fingers clumsy and useless. "Careful!" Cole's voice came from behind me. It wasn't a command, just a quiet caution. He had started bringing up the contents of the lower shelves, armfuls of loose records and bound volumes that he laid out on a long oak table. He was working near a precarious-looking shelving unit I used for temporary storage, piled high with boxes we had moved earlier. "That top one is unstable," I said, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. The archivist in me taking over, a familiar and safe role. He glanced up at the box I indicated, which was indeed listing at a dangerous angle. "I see it." He grabbed a small stepladder from a corner and unfolded it. As he climbed, the metal legs scraped against the stone floor. He reached for the box, but his movement caused the entire stack to shift. A collective groan of stressed cardboard filled the air. "Wait," I said, standing up. My panic was gone, replaced by a sudden, absolute clarity. This was my domain. I knew its physics, its weak points. "Don't pull it. You'll bring the whole thing down." He stopped, his hand hovering in the air. He looked down at me, a flicker of his usual arrogance in his eyes, as if he were about to dismiss me. But he didn't. He waited. "The weight is distributed all wrong," I explained, walking closer. I pointed. "That box on the left, the small one. It's full of land deeds. Vellum. It's much heavier than it looks. It's the anchor. You need to slide it back an inch. Gently. It will resettle the center of gravity." I was speaking his language. "Physics." "Wait." Gravity. He looked from my face to the stack of boxes and back again. For a long moment, he just studied me. The confident contractor was gone, replaced by a man on a wobbly ladder, taking instructions from the quiet librarian. The power dynamic for the first time had been completely inverted. I was the one with the knowledge. I was the one in control. He gave a short, sharp nod. Okay, slowly, carefully, he did exactly as I said. He nudged the small, heavy box. There was a soft sigh as the stack resettled, the teetering top box now sitting flush and stable. He was then able to lift it off easily and bring it down. He set the box on the floor and folded the ladder, leaning it against the wall. He turned to me, wiping a smear of dust from his cheek with the back of his hand. "Thanks," he said, and it sounded different from the perfunctory acknowledgments in the town square. There was a note of respect in it, of surprise. He had seen me, really seen me, for the first time, not as a ghost, but as someone competent, someone who knew things he didn't. "You know this place," he stated. It wasn't a question. "It's my job," I said, the words feeling inadequate. It was more than a job. It was my shell, my armor, my entire world. And tonight, he had entered it, not as an intruder, but as a reluctant partner. Sometime around 4 in the morning, the last of the vulnerable items were moved to high ground. The basement was a lost cause for now, but the main hall was a sprawling infirmary of drying paper. We had done all we could. The adrenaline that had fueled us for hours began to ebb away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. The storm still raged outside, a wild, untamed thing. And then, with a final, furious gust of wind that rattled the tall windows in their frames, the power, which had been flickering in the rest of the town, died completely. The emergency lights in the hall flickered once, then went out, plunging us into absolute, profound blackness. My breath hitched. The darkness was total, a physical weight. "Stay put." Cole's voice came out of the void, calm and steady. A moment later, the beam of his flashlight cut through the black, a miniature sun. He found me with the light, and I had to squint against the sudden brightness. Then he clicked on his phone's light as well, setting it on a table to cast a wider, softer glow. I did the same. Our small, private space was illuminated by twin pillars of cold, digital light. We were in the main reading room, surrounded by tables laden with drying history. The air was thick with the smell of wet paper, dust, and rain. We were trapped. The roads were impassable, the power was out, and the night was still dark. There was nothing to do but wait for the dawn. Cole sank onto the edge of a heavy oak table, the wood groaning under his weight. He ran a hand over his face, smearing the grime. He looked utterly spent. The confident swagger was gone, stripped away by hours of labor and the oppressive dark. All that was left was a tired man in a damp shirt. I hovered nearby, unsure what to do. My usual instinct was to retreat, to find a corner and make myself small. But there were no corners left to hide in. The world had shrunk to this small circle of light, and he was in it with me. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the howl of the wind. It wasn't the comfortable silence of my solitary life. It was a silence charged with everything unspoken, with the ghost of his touch on my hand, with the shared trauma of the flood. He broke it. "I always thought this place was creepy," he said, his voice quiet. He gestured vaguely into the darkness around us. "All the old stuff. Dead people's things." I bristled, a reflexive defense of my sanctuary. "It's not creepy. It's history. It's people's lives." He looked at me, a faint, tired smile on his lips. "Yeah, I get that now." I think he looked around the room at the piles of paper we had saved. "It's peaceful, though. When it's not flooding," the admission surprised me. Cole, the man of noise and action, finding peace in my silent world. "It's quiet," I offered. "That's why I like it. You're always here," he observed. "Even on weekends sometimes. I see the light on in your office." A fresh wave of heat washed over me. He'd noticed. He, the blazing star at the center of the town's universe, had noticed the faint, distant light of my small planet. I'd spent so much time observing him, and all the while he had been, in his own way, observing me too. There's always work to do," I stammered, feeling exposed. He was quiet for a long moment, just looking at his hands. They were scraped and dirty, the knuckles raw. The hands that had fixed so many things. The hands that had touched mine. People think I've got it all figured out, he said suddenly, his voice so low I had to strain to hear him over the wind. Because I can swing a hammer. Because I'm not. I don't know. Afraid to talk to people. He let out a short, humorless laugh. It's an act. Most of it, my heart stuttered. This was a confession. A crack in the facade. The confident, arrogant man I had resented and admired was peeling back a layer, showing me something raw and vulnerable beneath. I'm good at this, he said, waving a hand at the general idea of physical work. Building things. Tearing things down. It's easy. It makes sense. People don't make sense. He looked up, and his eyes found mine in the dim light. I'm alone a lot, too. Just in a louder way than you are. The silence that followed this was different. It was fragile, intimate. He had offered a piece of his hidden self, a truth he didn't have to share. The air between us vibrated with it, and in that moment, I felt a strange surge of bravery. He had shown me his vulnerability. It felt only fair to show him mine. I always thought you hated this place. I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. That you hated me for being a part of it. This quiet, dusty world. He looked genuinely shocked. Hated you? Why would I hate you? Because I'm this, I said, gesturing to myself, to my neat clothes, now rumpled and damp, to the whole concept of who I was. Quiet, bookish, not like you. The confession was out before I could stop it, a shameful little truth. I was intimidated by you. Cole stared at me. The tired lines around his eyes seemed to soften. He pushed himself off the table and took a step closer. The circle of light from our phones seemed to shrink, pulling us tighter together. Leo, he said. He used my name. For the first time ever, he said my name. It sounded strange, and yet perfectly right in his mouth. My own name, a word I heard so rarely, suddenly felt like the most intimate secret. I was never judging you, he said, his voice a low, serious rumble. I think I was jealous. The word was absurd. Of what? My cardigans? My intimate knowledge of 19th century tax law. A flicker of my old sarcastic armor. He almost smiled. Of the quiet, he said. You seem content in it. You fit. You build a world for yourself, and you live in it. I just build things for other people. I don't have a place that's mine. He was only a foot away now. I could feel the heat coming off his body. I could smell the rain and the sweat and something else, something that was just him. My carefully ordered world was tilting on its axis, spinning out of control. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This is happening. This is real. He took another half step, closing the remaining distance. He lifted a hand, slowly, hesitantly, as if giving me time to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was frozen, pinned by the intensity in his eyes. His fingers brushed my cheek. His touch was feather-light, questioning. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, and the roughness of his skin sent another shiver through my entire body. I closed my eyes, leaning into the touch instinctively. Leo, he whispered again, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And then he leaned in, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was slow, hesitant. It was a question asked in a language my body understood better than my mind. His lips were chapped and firm, and they moved against mine with a sort of wondering gentleness. It was the most honest thing I had ever felt. My hands, of their own accord, came up to rest on his chest. I could feel the solid muscle beneath his damp shirt, the thundering beat of his heart that matched my own. I wasn't the archivist. He wasn't the contractor. We were just two people in the dark, in the eye of a storm, confessing a truth that had no words. He deepened the kiss slightly, a low sound rumbling in his chest. I opened my mouth to him, a surrender and an invitation all at once. It was messy and real, and it tasted of rain and exhaustion and a longing so profound it stole the air from my lungs. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His hand was still on my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. The small, intimate gesture was more overwhelming than the kiss itself. He started, then stopped. He didn't seem to have words. "Me too," I whispered, though I had no idea what I was agreeing to. It didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling. We stood there for a long time, huddled together in the dark, while the storm raged on outside, and a completely different kind of storm began inside of me. The dawn came slowly, filtering through the tall, grimy windows as a weak, gray light. The storm had broken. The wind had died down to a mournful sigh, and the rain had softened to a gentle patter. The world was quiet again. I woke with a start, my neck stiff. I had dozed off, slumped against the table. A dusty old coat Cole had found somewhere draped over my shoulders. He was already awake. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light, staring out at the drenched town square. The intimacy of the night, the darkness that had held us, was gone. The harsh light of day had returned, and with it, a cold, stark reality. My stomach clenched. He turned, and his face was a closed door. The vulnerability from the night before was gone, replaced by a guarded, distant expression. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Looks like the worst is over," he said, his voice flat. He started gathering his things, his flashlight, his rain slicker, which was now mostly dry. He moved with a brisk, businesslike efficiency. The air was thick with unspoken things. The memory of the kiss, of his confession, hung between us like a ghost. A ghost I desperately wanted to acknowledge, and one he seemed determined to exorcise. "Cole," I started, my voice small. "I've got to go." He cut me off, not unkindly, but with a finality that made my blood run cold. "Need to check on a few other properties. See what the damage is." He slung his jacket over his shoulder. He looked like the contractor again, the stranger from the town square. My heart began to sink, a stone plummeting into a deep, cold well. This is it. The recoil. I'm a fool. He walked to the door, his boots loud on the stone floor. He paused with his hand on the handle, his back to me. For a single, breathtaking moment, I thought he would turn, that he would say something. Anything. "I'll send the bill for my time," he said, his voice tight. And then he was gone. The heavy oak door swung shut behind him, the sound echoing through the cavernous hall. I was alone. The silence that descended was nothing like the peaceful quiet I had always cherished. It was a hostile, roaring void. It was the absence of him, the absence of the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the weight of his hand on my cheek. My carefully ordered world, which had been so beautifully and terrifyingly upended, had snapped back into place, but all the pieces were wrong. I looked around the room, at the drying papers, the evidence of our shared labor. It didn't feel like a victory anymore. It felt like the scene of a crime, and I was the only victim. A spiral of doubt and self-recrimination began, sharp and vicious. It was a mistake. Of course it was a mistake. We were two exhausted people in a crisis. Adrenaline, proximity, darkness. A textbook case of a temporary, situational lapse in judgment. He was a straight man, a man's man. He had been confused, or maybe even just using the moment for a fleeting, anonymous comfort. And I, the quiet, lonely archivist, had read an entire novel into a single sentence. I had mistaken a moment of shared humanity for a confession of love. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, acrid burn in my throat. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically going through the motions of salvaging the archive. Martha and a few volunteers arrived, clucking with sympathy over the damage, praising me and Cole for our work. Every time someone said his name, it was a fresh twist of a knife. "That Cole," Martha said, "he's a good man to have in a crisis, a good man in a crisis." That's all he was. That's all it was. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. I retreated back into my shell, but the shell was cracked. My solitude, once a comfort, was now tainted. The silence of the archive wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. The quiet of my apartment felt like a tomb. Every corner held a memory of a life lived alone, a life that had, for a few short hours, felt like it could be something more. I avoided the town square. I took my lunch in my office instead of on the bench where I might see his truck, but I couldn't avoid him entirely. Once I saw him from my window, laughing with someone on the street. The sound didn't reach me, but I could imagine it, that easy, booming laugh. It felt like a punch to the gut. He was fine. He had moved on. His world was still turning, as bright and loud as ever, while mine had ground to a halt. A week passed. 7 days. 168 hours of silence. No call. No text. No invoice for his time. The lack of the bill was almost the worst part. It meant he couldn't even face the transactional nature of our relationship. He wanted to erase the entire night. To erase me. My former solitude returned, but it was a poisoned, hollow thing. It was no longer a choice, but a sentence. The fortress I had built to keep the world out now felt like a prison I couldn't escape. The ache I had carried for him, once a secret, foolish thing, was now a gaping, infected wound. On the 8th day, I was preparing to lock up. The sun was setting, casting long, melancholic shadows across the reading room. I was tired, not the physical exhaustion of that night, but a deep, soul-crushing weariness. I had decided to accept it, to rebuild my walls thicker this time, to forget the kiss, the confession, the feel of his hand in mine, to go back to being the ghost. I heard the heavy oak door creak open. I tensed, expecting Martha with a last-minute question. But it was him. Cole stood in the doorway, framed by the fading light. He wasn't wearing his work clothes. He was in a clean shirt and jeans. He didn't have any tools. He just stood there, his hands shoved into his pockets, looking lost and uncertain. The confidence was gone again. He looked as tired as I felt. My heart stopped, then started again with a painful, frantic thud. My throat went dry. He just looked at me. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. A week of unspoken fear and anger and hurt swirled in the air between us. I found my voice first, a cracked and bitter thing. Did you forget to send the bill? Sarcasm, my oldest and weakest shield. The words hit him. I saw him flinch. He looked down at the floor, then back at me, his eyes filled with a misery that mirrored my own. Leo, can we talk? He asked, his voice low and rough. Not here. I stared at him. Talk. After a week of torturous silence, he wanted to talk. Part of me, the wounded, angry part, wanted to tell him to leave, to tell him it was too late. But the other part of me, the part that still felt the ghost of his lips on mine, was screaming yes. He said he wanted to talk somewhere quiet. He added a faint, wry twist to his mouth. Which is funny. Coming in here, I didn't smile. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. He drove. I sat in the passenger seat of his truck, the cab smelling of sawdust and coffee in him. It was an overwhelmingly masculine space, a space I never thought I'd be in. We didn't speak. I just watched the familiar streets of the town slide by, feeling like a stranger in my own life. He didn't take me to a bar or a coffee shop. He drove out of town, down the winding road that led to Blackwood Lake. It was a place I rarely went, a place for summer tourists and teenagers looking for privacy. By the time we arrived, dusk had settled, and the lake was a sheet of dark, polished glass, reflecting the bruised purple and orange of the twilight sky. He parked at the edge of a deserted gravel lot overlooking the water. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the distant cry of a loon. He didn't look at me. He just stared out the lake, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked nervous, terrified even. The strong, silent type was a myth. He was just a man as scared as I was. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words addressed to the windshield. For just leaving, and for the week. For not calling. I waited, my heart a slow, heavy drum. I panicked, he confessed, his voice raw. That night in the archive, I've never felt like that before. He shook his head, a gesture of disbelief. Not with anyone. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were pleading. Especially not with a guy. There it was. The truth. The fear. It scared the hell out of me. He continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Everything I thought I knew about myself just went sideways. And the next morning, in the light, with everything back to normal, I didn't know what to do. So I did what I always do when I'm scared. I ran. He let out a shaky breath. And this last week, this stupid, silent week, it's been worse than the fear. The quiet it was awful. It was the wrong kind of quiet. Hearing him articulate his own fear, his own confusion, was like a key turning in a lock inside me. My anger, my hurt that didn't vanish, but they softened. They made room for something else. Seeing his anxiety gave me a foothold for my own bravery. I thought you regretted it, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I thought it was a mistake. That I was a mistake. I spent a week convincing myself that you were disgusted, or that you were just using the moment, and I was a fool for thinking it meant anything. He winced as if I'd struck him. No, God, no, Leo. It wasn't a mistake. He reached across the console, his hand hovering in the space between us, just as it had in the archive. The mistake was me running away from it. I looked at his hand, then at his face. The fear was still there, but so was a fierce resolve. He was here. He came back. Slowly, I lifted my own hand and met his. This time, there was no accident, no hesitation. His fingers laced with mine, a firm, deliberate connection. His hand was warm and strong, engulfing mine. It felt like an anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. It felt like coming home. I don't know what this is, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. I don't know what we're doing or where it goes. This is all new territory for me. And it's terrifying. He squeezed my hand. But the thought of not finding out, that's worse. I want to find out. With you, tears I hadn't even realized were forming pricked at my eyes. All the fear and loneliness of the past week, of the past 5 years, began to recede, washed away by the simple, profound honesty of this moment. He was scared. I was scared. And here we were, deciding to be scared together. Okay, I whispered. It was the biggest, bravest word I had ever said. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft, warm kiss to my knuckles. It was a promise, a gesture of commitment more tangible and real than any contract or blueprint. It was the start of building something new, something just for us. That was 6 weeks ago. The morning light is filtering through the blinds of my apartment, striping the opposite wall in pale gold. The air smells not of old paper, but of fresh coffee. It's a Saturday. There's a sound from the kitchen, the clink of a ceramic mug against the counter. Cole. I roll over in bed. My bed. Our bed. His work boots are by the front door, scuffed and perpetually coated in a fine layer of dust. His jacket is slung over the back of my perfectly ordered reading chair. He is a disruption, a beautiful, chaotic element introduced into my sterile equation. He walks into the bedroom, a mug in each hand. He's wearing a faded t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants, his hair a mess from sleep. He looks nothing like the intimidating contractor from the town square, and everything like the man who held my hand by the lake. Coffee's ready, he says, his voice still thick with sleep. He hands me a mug. Our fingers brush. This time, I don't pull away. I just smile. He sits on the edge of the bed, and we drink our coffee in a comfortable, easy silence. This silence isn't empty. It's full. It's the silence of shared space, of mutual presence. It's the quiet I was always looking for, but never knew how to find. I look at him, at the way the morning light catches the line of his jaw, the same way it did when I used to watch him from my office window. It feels like a lifetime ago. I was a man living in a fortress of his own making, curating the past because he was too afraid to live in the present. My life was a book I was afraid to write. Cole was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the storm, the burst pipe, the flood that threatened to destroy everything I had so carefully preserved. But he was also the one who waded into the darkness with me, who helped me save the most precious things. And in the process, he didn't just help me salvage an archive. He salvaged me. He broke down my walls, not with a sledgehammer, but with a quiet confession in the dark. He showed me that strength isn't about being loud or fearless. It's about being brave enough to admit you're scared. It's about having the courage to come back. He catches me watching him and raises an eyebrow. What? Nothing, I say, taking a sip of coffee. Just thinking. He smiles, a slow, easy smile that reaches his eyes. He leans in and kisses me, a soft, familiar gesture that still makes my heart skip a beat. It tastes like coffee and the promise of a future I never dared to imagine. A future that is noisy and messy and wonderfully, terrifyingly real. And I am no longer afraid to live in it.